generally distinguished people, that's all of you. It's an absolute honor and privilege to be with you here this evening. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is a particular honor to speak. Thank you. Toda. It gets a little limited after that. It's a particular honor always to be in the presence of Shimon Peres, who is an old friend of mine, but also a mentor. And I was just thinking when we were watching the earlier film about the great medical and scientific advances to allow us to live longer. I have a very simple suggestion, really, which would get round all of that, which is that we examine Shimon medically and then try and clone him. I also would like to say it is a pleasure also to be here and to have listened to a great speech from Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was Prime Minister, became a former Prime Minister, became Prime Minister again. Don't read anything into that. There are some things that should be imitated and some not. But actually I was going to begin my speech to you by telling a story, if he doesn't mind, about Bibi. People often say I'm a friend of Israel, occasionally as a compliment. And actually I'm very proud to be a friend of Israel. People occasionally ask me to explain this, and I sometimes tell them a story that is actually about Bibi. And this was when he was first Prime Minister, and we attended a very smart dinner at the King David Hotel in my honor. And there was myself and Bibi sitting there together, and the waiter, a rather old guy, brings in the soup. And as he's just about to put the soup down, Bibi kind of half turns towards him. Anyway, the guy puts the soup, spills it into Bibi's lap. Okay? Now this is the thing. In many countries, including quite a few in this region, the waiter would have been in trouble. Okay? But this is Israel. And though I don't speak Hebrew, I could tell what the waiter was saying to Bibi, which is, why were you so stupid as to put your lap where I was going to put that soup? And the thing is, his reaction was, I'm really sorry. And I thought, well, that's democracy, and frankly, the people are the boss, and that's actually the healthiest form of government. I really want to make one very simple point to you today, and it is in a sense illustrated by the visit I made earlier today to Hebron, where I visited the tomb of the patriarchs, or as the Muslims say, the Ibrahimi Mosque, where Abraham rests. And when I was there, a Christian, with the governor, who was a Muslim, next door people of Jewish faith worshipping, tourists there, people from different parts of the world. And there we all were in this place, which is very special, very historic, but also a place where you can see the consequences of conflict. And there was, as there often is, at least in my case, a protester. The protester shouted and so on. What was interesting was within an hour of my leaving, I was receiving texts and emails from friends in the world saying, have you been involved in some incident or other? And I reflected on the world in which we live today and the characteristics of this world. It is interdependent. The economic crisis, climate change, the issues of security, the issue between Israelis and Palestinians, which is an issue even on the streets of Britain, never mind here. It's an interdependent world. It's a world in which power is shifting east. It's amazing, isn't it, how quickly the G8 has become the G20, with China and India and Brazil and others there at the center of decision-making. And always the force of globalization pushing us together, the internet and the technology that it implies. And above all, a world that is moving so fast, the compression of time. And with this new and changing world comes the reaction. And the choice for us in my country, in yours, around the world is really this. In this era of globalization where change happens so fast and where we are pushed together, is our attitude to be open to this change, to understand and try and seize its potential, or is our attitude to be closed, to be fearful? And that distinction, open versus closed, is in my view as important, sometimes more important, than what is often a 20th century ideological distinction between left and right. You can see it in the debates over trade and protectionism. You can see it in the debates about immigration, where some people use immigration as a way of arousing people's fears. And you can see it too when we come to consider the challenge that this extremism presents to us in our world today. Sometimes people want to confine this extremism to one place. Actually, it is the tragedy and the challenge of the modern world that it is not confined to one space. It's there, yes, certainly, in the terrorism in Iraq or Afghanistan, Pakistan. But we could add Yemen or Somalia. We could add the conflict here, the conflicts elsewhere in this region, but we could also add places such as the Philippines, where I was recently, where they explained to me that in the extremism there, 150,000 people have died in the last 10 years in the battles over Mindanao. And most dangerous of all is when there is a state or a government prepared to sponsor it. And I want to make a point here about the issue to do with Iran that is different from the point often made. I believe it is completely irresponsible to allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons capability. But I believe that even as I hope we are able to resolve that diplomatically, the export of extremism around the region and elsewhere is still a problem. In other words, that the problem is not simply a weapon, but a weapon with an ideology. And this ideology and those groups that are associated with it, when we come to analyze it, what is it? It's essentially a closed philosophy. These different groups of extremists who are linked together by a perversion of the proper faith of Islam, these extremists, they believe there is one truth, theirs. One legitimacy, the one they own. One answer, one faith. And when we close our minds to the possibility of the other, when we end up in the face of a world that is opening up the whole time, we close down. That is when we get the threat and the challenge. And where we are confronted militarily, we have to stand up militarily. But in the end, the best way to defeat a bad idea is by a good one. And that is not just freedom and democracy and justice, important though those concepts are. It is also about being open, facing tomorrow with confidence. And when we analyze the countries that will succeed in the modern world, they are those countries that are prepared to be open, that reject not just the methods of extremism, but reject the philosophy behind it. The countries that succeed will be the countries that develop their human capital, all of it, and develop it based on merit and not on privilege. And if that is true, the countries that succeed will be those that give women equal rights with men. Not just because it is right to do so, but because otherwise we waste the human capital of the nation. It is why racial bigotry is not just immoral, it is foolish. And why bigotry of faith is not just something antisocial in the modern world, but something that repels the very things that make the modern world worthwhile. This is how nations today succeed. This is what tomorrow is about. Not countries shut down, but countries innovative, creative, imaginative, constantly inspired by the possibility of change, not frightened by its impact. And so when the Prime Minister today said, and the President also spoke, of climate change and the challenge of it, and they talked, and we saw some of the film about the extraordinary ideas going on in electric vehicles, which we also hope to do in the United Kingdom. Solar power. It's a little bit of a struggle for us, but how are these things going to be done? Yes, they're going to be done by bright, clever young people, as we've just seen, but they're going to be developed in California and Bangalore and in Beijing, as well as in Tel Aviv and in other places of the world. And what's more, these people are going to talk to each other, and they're going to learn from each other, and they're going to develop with each other. And they're not going to ask whether someone is white or black or brown or yellow. They will simply ask, what are their qualities as a human being? What can they give? What can they offer? What can they do for the future, the common future of all of us? So when I, in the work that I do, reflect on the Israel and Palestine question, yes, it's about negotiations, and it's about boundaries, and it's about changes on the ground. But it's also about changes in the mind. When I've visited the Prime Minister's home, and in the study there is a map on the wall, which is a big map of this region and beyond this region. And frankly, when you see the size of all these different countries, you have to go quite close to the map to see Israel and the Palestinian territory. And when we think about how much this means, despite this small territory, how much it means, not just to you, of course primarily to you, but not just to you, but to all of us. The question that is often asked is, why is it so important to achieve peace? And I always reply, because peace is a symbol not simply of enmities that are past and set aside, but of the opportunities of the future that are to be grasped. But you know, the question that's less often asked is, why are the opponents of peace so keen to deny the possibility of peace. And that is, I'm afraid, because they also understand the symbolism. And they know that if we were able to achieve peace between Israelis and Palestinians, that would not simply be to the enormous benefit of those that live here and those that live in the Palestinian territory. It would be of profound significance to the whole of humankind. Because, to go back to where I was earlier today, Hebron, the resting place of Abraham, who came out of Mesopotamia and came to Haran, an immigrant in a strange land. And the faith that he had, that because it was based on values and not on icons or idols, became universal and gave rise to my faith as well as yours. And we reflect on our history and we recognize it. And we reflect on the conflict. And we reflect on those that have died over a long period of time in this conflict and others. But we also then reflect on the progress. And when I come to Israel and I see it and I think of how years ago, when I think the British may have had something to do with things around here, and I reflect how this country began and what it created. The attitude of mind that created it was not a closed mind. It was a mind open, confident, full of the possibilities of the future. You know, the Chinese have a word for crisis, wei qi, which is also means opportunity. And when I was reflecting on President Peres's conference and what I would say today, I thought I would conclude by saying this: that in every crisis and in every challenge are the seeds of opportunity and hope. It is not impossible to overcome the crises or the challenges. And you know what shows that this is true? What shows this is true is the progress of humankind for all its difficulties. And that progress is based ultimately not on values that are confined to one faith, one race, one creed, or one color. They are the values, the universal values of the human spirit. And if we can capture that spirit in our discussion and debate about tomorrow, we can maybe understand better yesterday, do more to help today, and make the tomorrow of my children and yours a brighter one, a better one, a more prosperous one, and yes, a more peaceful one too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blair.